All right. Thank you so much.
Yes, yeah, I can hear you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So, as I was saying, today we're bringing together perspectives from telecoms operations, legal and regulatory affairs, identity technology to discuss SIM swap vulnerabilities, where they actually emerge, what regulators and courts are increasingly interested in, and what a defensible registration process actually looks like in practice. So, joining us today are Bunmi Akadiri. He's a telco professional, customer acquisition and management IT. And we have Cynthia Onwuegbuzie, head of legal and regulatory affairs at Seamfix. And then we also have George Uduma, the lead of accounts management at Seamfix. And three of them are going to help us explore this topic from multiple perspectives, right? So Bunmi Akadiri is bringing extensive experience in telecoms technology, customer acquisition operations, service resilience, and IT governance. And with responsibility, he's responsible for the systems and processes that support subscriber acquisition in the Nigerian telco ecosystem. What a bio. And then we have Cynthia Onwuegbuzie. She brings extensive experience in telecoms law and regulatory affairs. She has worked across both operator and technology environments. And we have George, who has spent more than 10 years working with telecom operators on identity, onboarding, operational processes, and customer management. Together, they offer a unique perspective on SIM swap fraud from operational processes and then regulatory scrutiny. I would like one of them, maybe Cynthia, to just, offer 2 cents on the topic before we move on to the conversation proper.
Okay. Good afternoon, Uyo. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Uyo, for that wonderful introduction of every one of us on this webinar. Moving straight to it, I would say I think the interesting thing about SIM replacement fraud, or SIM swap as it's commonly called, is that the fraud itself takes minutes, but the questions that follow can last for years. And we've seen this happen in various climes. One reason it is so persistent, I would say, is that the fraudster often does not need to break into the network at all, right? They only work on the process around it, gathering information, building a convincing story, and even persuading someone to treat an unauthorized request as a legitimate one. So it looks like the system can be working exactly as designed. However, the problem is that the wrong person has talked, has made the organization believe, or made the organization believe that you can use something else on their behalf, right? So I would just say that it has moved beyond just being a fraud problem. It is now an identity and control, regulatory, and governance problem.
Wow.
And we have to start looking into not only how the fraudster got into the customer's account, but we have to start looking at a different set of questions. Maybe most importantly, how or who was the person that requested the change, and how was it authenticated. So I think that is the lens I think we should be looking at it today, especially in today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that perspective, Cynthia. I bet you cannot tell that we're here for a good time. It's going to be a very rich conversation. I can't wait to dive in deep. So, as a way of beginning this webinar, I want to touch on the first segment, the state of SIM swap fraud in Nigeria and West Africa. And Mr. Bunmi, I would like to ask you, I want you to be the person that answers the first question. Mr. Bunmi, SIM swap fraud has been around for years, but yet it continues to make headlines. From your perspective, why does it remain such a persistent challenge for operators?
All right. All right. Thank you so much, Rio, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm sure you know things are evolving around you. We are talking about digital evolution. And so as you see, we move away from the conventional ways of doing things. Everything now is through digital. And so SIM swap is one of the most, I think SIM replacement is one of the threats to that digital financial economy we talk about, right? And like Cynthia rightly said, I just, people playing around these processes and system and, taking over people's identity and smartly move away. And you see a lot of people losing billions of naira, millions of naira because of this. But the industry is trying to be ahead of this fraudster. Nigerian Communication Commission, I'm sure you are aware, in 2021, we came up with a name link secret policy that for every MSI, then you must link into a national identity number. This is part of the initiative to curb the SIM swap fraud. But has that been able to achieve it? I can tell you for sure, not at all. Because you know about the social engineering, cyber attack, all that is happening. So you see these people also trying to game the systems, with more advanced way of exploring the system. So the industry, where I sit, the MNOs are also doing a whole lot to ensure that we put things in place to ensure that we bring this to a BRS minimum. But it has been totally eliminated, I can tell you for sure, not yet. We still see a very good number coming up. As a matter of fact, based on the NIPS record, I think it is the one that is topping the, in terms of digital fraud that happened, they recorded last year. SIM swap is one of the top, if not the first 5. I think it's among the top 5. This SIM replacement we talk about. So it's a very interesting topic. But in terms of still happening, it's still very, very on the high side. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. One thing that's standing out to me is that the value that's attached to the mobile number has increased significantly over the years because of this unified identity that's attached to the mobile number. And the fraudsters, like you rightly said, they are evolving their tactics, social engineering every other day. Thank you so much for that perspective, sir. So I want to also ask you again, how has the role of the mobile number changed over the last decade? And why does that make SIM swap fraud even more significant today?
The role of mobile number. So today, I'm sure people know your account number. They don't need to even ask you your account number. They know a lot of people will have this fintech bank wallet. You have the likes of Kunpay, PamPay, this and that and all that. And so that alone has, give them more leverage. But in terms of the number from the national security point of view, right? In terms of the number management, what we have seen over the time is that things have moved from where it used to be to a new dimension now. There are a lot of policy that NCC formulated. I'm sure some of us will have probably heard that on a particular network, you can't have more than 4 numbers. We call it mass 4 rules, right?
Yes.
Before now, 100 lines, just one individual in Nigeria, 200. So you can't trace who is doing kidnapping, who is doing fraudster, who is taking over people's identity to steal their money. But to a large extent, I can tell you, I give it telecoms for that. To a large extent, that has reduced. So even though you have all your mobile number now linked to your NIN, not only that, the thing we also mandate is that for every SIM replacement, NIN will be verified real time. Real time is how to be verified. The way we do that is that when you walk into any of the store, they take your live image. So 2 things happen. Your live image that is taken is taken. One is sent to the NIMSI database. You have your image also sitting on NIMSI database. So there's what we call facial matching. So it does a live comparison of your image and then your image on the NIMSI side. If it matches, it allows you to go through. Not only that, it also does that your NIN is also valid. I think that's even the first point of call. It checks that your NIN is valid. It is when these tools you've passed successfully that the telecom are expected to now go ahead and proceed your SIM replacement. Of course, there are some other basic check that will happen in terms of your existing KYC number with the telecom itself, and do some basic check, your frequently dial number and all that. To a large extent, to be honest, this has reduced the level of SIM swap fraud. But that is 0%, like I said. I'm not going to come here and tell you that it's not happening again at all. Okay, because over the time, you see people doing AI proven images. He looks exactly like you. Even the technology we brought in about liveliness detection that, okay, blink your eye, move your mouth, to the left, to the right. AI is able to do that. So this is very difficult when you have a sane environment, right? But you will understand that there are also at times you have some bad egg, even in the midst of your good one, right? So because of the internal collision at times, some of these things may happen.
Right.
Okay. But to a large extent where I work, we've done a lot of cleanup, and I can tell you that we have a very perfect and salient environment. So for most of this, the rate of litigation and all that, it has really, really gone down. And I want to believe with the use of technology and with also the more enforcement that have been put in place, I think this thing, we can actually overcome it. So that's what I can say about it.
So the future is looking bright. That's amazing. Thank you for that, sir. So you mentioned something about AI and what people are able to manipulate through AI today. I want to ask if there are any trends you are observing across Nigeria or even West Africa as a whole that telecom operators need to be paying closer attention to.
So it's not just telecom operators alone. This is in collaboration with all the key stakeholders. I'm talking about NIMS, I'm talking about NCC, I'm talking about security agents, telecom themselves, and then maybe people that are into identity management like Seamfix and other, tech companies. The support required and things being put in place are a system is coming up now called TAMS, right? I don't know if some of us are familiar with TAMS.
Yes,
So TAMS will be doing a real time. Yes. As things are going on, right? You are able to know from which particular MNO or the telecom that is performing it, and that notification goes across to everybody. So, and on your alternative line as well. So if you are not the one initiating the swap, you get a prompt, either email or SMS on your other alternative number, and the banks will be notified. The NCC will get the copy. I believe these are ways to just be proactive about it. This thing I'm talking about is still evolving. It's happening already. I think we are at the integration already with the terms that I mentioned. So if that comes in, I think it's going to help a whole lot. It's going to help the security agent, to help the telecom for Nigeria as well. And I believe it can be like a guide for other West Africa and other African countries, because this is all over. It's not just peculiar to Nigeria. It's happening in other West African and African countries.
Thank you, sir, for that. So I just want to move on to the next section. That first section, I feel, has been very enlightening. I've learned so much. I am taking notes down. My notes are full already. Thank you so much, Mr. Bunmi, for that lovely insights that you've given us for the first session. So I want to move to where the registration process actually breaks down. And I want to ask George. So George, you've worked with operators across multiple markets. What are some of the most common weaknesses you see in the registration processes?
Okay, thank you very much, Uyo, for that question, and good afternoon, everyone that is on the call. Yeah, from my experience with working with operators, I would say the weakness is really one single point of failure, right? It is usually a combination of identity verification, a combination of people, processes, and also the visibility, right? So for first identity verification, the organization may have a process for establishing that the person presenting themselves is actually a legitimate subscriber. The telco may say, okay, this person is coming to do a SIM swap or SIM registration is actually the owner of the SIM, right? But the question here would be whether that verification is actually strong enough and consistently enforced. This now depends on the system that's in place. The second is the agent compliance, right? MNOs and other operators can have very good policies, but when you have a large distributed agent network, the challenge becomes how consistent are they? Are all the agents following the process? Are they using the same controls? What happens when an agent encounters an exception and so on, right? And that brings us to visibility, right? when something goes wrong, can an operator actually reconstruct exactly what has happened? Can you say, okay, there is a breach, this is how it happened? Can you be able to say, identify who particularly performed that transactions within the ecosystem, right? Can you also be able to say what verifications were performed? Was there an override in case of, if it was like there's some manual overrides, activities or processes that are there? Who approved it? These are questions that needs to be answered, right? And if you're not able to answer this question, then there's the problem of audit, right? Then you have the manual processes. Every time we introduce too much manual intervention into a high volume process like SIM swap and SIM registration, we create opportunities for inconsistencies and also human error for those that are responsible for this. Yeah, then next would be like exceptions. This is probably one of the areas that deserve more attention because the normal registration process, for example, may be very well controlled, right? But these fraudsters are often very smart people, just like Bunmi have highlighted on this call. And what they often look for are they look for what happens when the normal process cannot be completed, right? So from my experience, this is what I would say have been some of the common weaknesses that we see during this registration process. And yes, the MMOs are putting a lot of steps in trying to mitigate it. NCC is also looking at this, but these are some of the challenges that we are still able to see within the system that we expect to be tightening to further reduce some of these problems and challenges that we face.
Thank you so much, George. So we're looking at weak identity verification. You mentioned something about inconsistent compliance amongst the agents themselves.
Agents, yeah.
And then some manual processes too, and then limited controls around exceptions.
Yes,
Thank you so
as well
much.
as the audit.
The audit visibility as well. Yeah, perfect. Thank you, George. So I want to push this question to both Mr. Bunmi and George. How can operators balance customer convenience without stronger verification controls, with stronger verification controls? How are you going to manage customer experience and also ensure that the verification controls are still strong enough?
All right. I think I want to add one or two things to the other question before we move to this one.
Okay.
Talking about where the processes break down. So George has rightly said, yes, there's a part of the partners who are responsible for most of the agents, the third-party agent that the telecoms are using. And there's a part of internal processes. There's a part of the regulatory. And I'm going to bring something to your notice on this. Now, you know, the law based on the NIS linking policy of 2021, right? Every citizen in Nigeria is entitled to how many NIN? It's just one, right?
Yes.
As in Uyo, you should have just one NIN, one national identity number. So, but to what we have seen over the time, because when you talk about where the process break down, I want to tell you that it's even starting from the enrollment platform of those NIN. So we have cases whereby an individual is having more than 20 NIN. The same Uyo have like 20 NIN. You can imagine what Uyo can do. So because once the NIN is valid on the system and it's your image, the system will allow you to go, yes or no?
Yes.
So it starts from those. We've given this feedback at industry level, and there is need. I know NIMC is taking a deliberate action. Most of those NIN have been invalidated because these are things we pick from our side as telecoms, and we flag it to them. Most of them, we deny them service once we detect it that this individual is having more than 2 NIN, because you can see from the image that this is the same person. And then one of the law recently that NCC also enforces that before you can acquire a line, that you must be 18 years, right? So, of course, NIMC being the source of truth for any form of identity now, we are responsible. MNO, we don't even take your date of birth. If you like, call yourself whatever age. It's whatever NIMC return to us. Okay? So we implemented our system in such a way that you cannot even bypass that 18. But what we have seen, most of the registration that we block today is that you will see somebody that is a minor. and it will just assign like 35, 50, 60 years age. But when you look at this image, you discover that this is actually a minor. So it is not just on the MNO side or the telecom side, even on the other side too, there is need for us to also do a overhauling or more. I know they are doing a whole lot. They suspended some NIM, they've invalidated some NIM, but we also have the breakdown coming from that. Internally, what we have done on some of our side is that we even have a process to ensure that people don't walk out to brick and mortar. We do a deliberate, on our side here, that we go on the field and arrest any of our partner that we notice are doing roadside registration. So these are things, process breakdown when there is a conniver or somebody is not doing what is supposed to do. In terms of regulation, in terms of the processes, if everything should behave the way we should behave, then we'll not be talking about this. But of course, the big question is the economic situation of the country. Somebody want to set the pre-activated SIM and all that, pre-registered SIM and all that, that they will not even appear. But we've eliminated that with this, introduction of NIM verification for every new registration or SIM replacement. You have to go through this. So it breaks down from there. So coming back to the last question you just asked, Nanda, how do you balance up the user experience or customer convenience, and you still want to ensure you are compliant? It has to be balanced. Okay. And we have to let them know. For instance, part of this coming is, at the point where you want to capture, to be sure that it's real human being, because we know we will always have those bad eggs. You will always have them, right? We bring improve the technology that is being used to detect that this person before me is actually a real person, and you are who you are supposed to be, that you are not A and you are trying to impersonate B. So things are being put in place in terms of those liveness detection. There are latest technology in town that combine both passive and active liveness check. Like the one I mentioned the other time, the lively one is the one, active one is the one that will be asking you to do this and do that. But there are other passive ones that will also check some things rather than you blinking your eye and all that. So all those things have been put in place. The customer experience will probably be, yes, it will not really say it's going to bring all convenience, because by the time you ask the customer to move to the right, to move to the left, but how quickly those machines can do those things, what we just need to improve on. But I tell you, we just have to balance the two, and that is what we're on our side here.
Thank you so much, sir. So security cannot create unnecessary friction. It's both of them must come hand in hand, right? Customer experience and security must come hand in hand. Thank you for that, sir. So George, over to you. What do you think?
Yeah, thank you, Uyo. Yeah, just like Bunmi has mentioned, yeah, when there should be a balance between customer experience and also security, right? When verification is automated and also integrated into the workflow, right, control can actually make the process faster, even though it might be inconveniencing for customer experience, but we need to balance the two, because at the end of the day, we need to get things right. Okay, so the objective should not be to actually remove the controls in the name of customer experience. The objective should be to make the controls intelligent enough that legitimate customers move through the process quickly, while suspicions or failed transactions receive additional scrutiny, right? This is because the best control is not necessarily the one that adds another step, right? It is the one that makes the right decision at the right point of the journey. So that is what my take would be in supporting to what Bunmi has just described for us.
Thank you so much, George. So stronger controls don't necessarily have to mean a lengthier process. In fact, a stronger control can shorten the process and even create a better customer experience for the customers. Thank you so much. Thank you, Bunmi and George. Thank you. So we've discussed where our registration processes can fail. But when a SIM swap incident occurs and then the complaint reaches regulators or the courts, the conversation is switching up immediately, right? The question is not just, okay, well, this fraud happened. They are now going to be asking whether the operator can properly demonstrate that the right controls were followed. So I want to introduce Cynthia now. Cynthia, from a legal and regulatory perspective, right, what are regulators and courts actually looking for? When a SIM swap fraud is investigated, what are the key questions that regulators and courts typically ask?
All right. I just want to state something. First of all, I think it's important to note that regulators or any courts, what they do is they assess implementation and not intention. So I think that's what I want to say to set the tone of what I'm about to discuss. And it is instructive to note that when a SIM replacement complaint lands in front of a regulator or a court, for example, nobody is asking whether a fraud happened. I mean, it goes without saying that a fraud has happened or possibly has happened. And what they start asking is a much simpler and harder question. Show me what you did. Let me see what you have done. Questions, for example, who initiated the replacement? Was that person even registered? Was he a registered subscriber? Were they physically present? Who or what or which agent performed the SIM replacement? Are there any audit trails? Or if it wasn't the actual subscriber, for example, if it was a proxy, was that proxy a valid proxy? Was that proxy was it verified? What kind of identification was used, to verify such a person? And this is me trying to take it through from what Bunmi and George have said. And all of these things I've noted or questions are presented if we're using Nigeria as the case study, in the guidelines on SIM replacement of 2022, even in any reputable regulator within Africa, they will have this. And so the issue here is we need to check. We're not checking against the document per se. We are checking as what have you done. And I think I want to state here that two things are very important: identity and authority. And they're not the same thing, because you may know exactly who a person is, but that doesn't give you the notion or that they are entitled to take control of a particular phone number. And that is the gap where most of these disputes, emanate from, because you having the identity or whatever social engineering thing you've done does not now give you the authority to own that. And I'll give, as we go along with this, I think this will be much more established in my conversations on this meeting.
Thank you, Cynthia. So something that you said just stood out to me. Identity and authority are different. The fact that we know that this SIM card belongs to somebody does not mean that they have the authority or are authorized to actually perform actions via that SIM card. Thank you for that, Cynthia. So next question for you. Can you walk us through how a regulator or a court might analyze a SIM swap incident step by step? How would they analyze it?
Okay, I think the easiest way to understand it is to follow the transaction backwards. And you could start with the fact everyone really accepts. So an unauthorized, as I said earlier, unauthorized replacement happened. Then you walk it down, and so the next thing will be, oh, who did it, right? That's the next question that the regulator will be asking. Were they the actual subscriber? Were they present? What records exist? And even again, another matter that I think I should have said was, internally, were there any audits? Because the operator is supposed to be seen to have done its audits and checks and balances within the system. So, and then you immediately fall out of that line at the first point where you cannot actually answer, with a record of that transaction, whether on the day when it happened or by that person. So that's the audit trail aspect. And then, people forget the audit part itself. And, you see operators, I always say this, operators have to audit replacements every now and then. I'm sure everyone, so that is something that is important, because it is mostly a situation where if you cannot present something that, provides a clear trail or defensible information that you did what and what, and maybe something still happened, but this is what you did, then you are at the mercy of the courts and their interpretation of your action or inactions.
Thank you, Cynthia, for that. This is very interesting. It's getting deeper and deeper and deeper. So which of these areas most commonly creates legal exposure for the operators?
I would say the biggest issue or concern is often not at the moment the fraud occurs, right? It is that point where the operator or the organization can no longer show can no longer show what happened, because you have like maybe weak identity checks and all. There's no proof that there's no proof of ownership of that number at that time. So when you have missing audit trails, like I mentioned, you don't even have the oversight of who the agent was, for example. It brings a big problem here. So that's already a first exposure. And the one that makes all others worse is weak evidence. And if I cannot really show what was done, by whom, and whether anyone at that time, it's like I'm arguing from a point of silence, because really, how do you want to explain yourself, right? The agent point, for example, is what's mentioned, and I took that from what Bunmi said at the beginning, because an operator, or someone may be liable for a replacement done fraudulently by its agent, and the dealer may have gone rogue. That is not a defense to Telecom the dealer went rogue. It is for us to describe the control failure, and good controls have to assume people can be manipulated. Social engineering is already a thing that we understand, and so the agents believe that a request is genuine should never be the only thing between a fraudster and the number. So all I'll say is that a control failure is really bad, but not being able to prove that control is even worse. And I think that's the major legal exposure that most companies or so, even in the fintech, will always have in this case.
Wow, this is so interesting. Thank you, Cynthia. So another question for you is, many operators, they focus on stopping the fraud, but from a legal perspective, why is proving what happens sometimes just as important as preventing it?
Because prevention and defensibility, or being defensive over what you've done, are two different things. We want to prevent the fraud, right? But once it has happened, we cannot prevent that particular incident anymore. What we can do is just to show what controls existed. And that's what most people try to prove. And whether, the particular company acted reasonably. 6 months later, that person may not even remember, or may have left the business, but the agents, the customer will always remember it differently. And so that's why the system should always be in a state where you have information that can prove a situation happened and what happened and everything. Because in law will say you cannot litigate from memory, but you can litigate from evidence. And I would say that Nigerian courts are increasingly putting that burden on, and even international courts are putting that burden holding record on the party holding the records. For example, I mean, there is I think there was a Supreme Court case from last year involving particular operator, and unauthorized billing, where the operator was found liable because it service that customer's account because nothing reported it. So you saw what I'm trying to say here. So where a company's records are the only evidence of what they could produce them, a missing record is not enough. It reads against you. So you can't defend yourself out of that kind of issue. It reads against you. So it's just to note here that you cannot litigate from memory, but you only litigate from evidence that is provided. And that's what stands.
Thank you,
I just want to note again that I mean, just to move on with that, I just wanted to move, because I mentioned that there was some international stuff. So there are other reasons why this matters, and because we now know that, I don't know, we didn't discuss that at the beginning, but the mobile number is no longer sitting only on the side of telecoms industry, right? Mobile numbers, they are now connected to your bank account, your wallet, even your social media and all of that. So a failure in a telecom or in the mobile network identity layer could create consequences somewhere else entirely. And there's a recent, an example, we noted that it happened in June 2026, where a high court of Kenya held both the operator and the bank, imagine that, liable for an unauthorized SIM swap, splitting the liability in I think it was 60-40, if I remember, against the operator and the bank. And the findings are really, really, I mean, you need to read out, it's really profound, because, according to them, they said that the court held of this entities owed the customer their own independent duty of care. So neither could point at the other, and it rejected that it rejected the operators and the banks, argument that and they had done all. I think it's even said for the operators' part, because the operator was noting that it was merely an infrastructure with company, and he had no visibility regarding the SIM swap, something like in that of that nature. What am I saying here is that we just need to note that it's no longer the customer experiences, on one digital ecosystem. It's not seeing it as this is for the bank or this is for telco. And the fraudster as well, is doing the same. And our control frameworks are finally being asked to recognize that. So visibility creates duty. Once you can have a visibility of something, it creates a duty of care on you and on the operator or any other organization that is handling the data of persons. And it's really important that this is managed in future.
Thank you, Cynthia. We have so many sound bites from Cynthia. Visibility creates duty. You can't litigate from memory. You can only litigate from evidence. And it's so interesting to see how this all plays out in real life. When the controls were if the controls had been put in place for that particular case, we wouldn't have seen it play out the way it did. So in most SIM swap disputes, we're seeing that it all boils down to whether or not the operator can prove that it did everything reasonably expected to prevent said SIM swap occurrence. Thank you, Cynthia. So what's interesting in all that we've discussed is that every one of these questions maps directly to a vulnerability within the registration process. And that's what we're going to be walking through in this next segment. So, George, the campaign behind today's webinar is called Shut the Fraud Door. What exactly are the 6 fraud doors?
All right, thank you. Thank you. I'd like to first that you confirm that you can still hear me.
Yes.
Okay. Right. I'll just jump right into them. We know that fraud is often enabled by gaps in the SIM registration process, right? So what exactly now be these gaps, right? And this is what we try to assign to this doors. So I've identified 6 areas where we refer to as the 6 fraud doors. And what I would like to make clear here is that these are not 6 completely different fraud problems. There are 6 different ways an attacker can get into the same registration process. All right. So if you close one door but leave the other 5 doors open, you have reduced one risk, but you have not necessarily secured the process, right? And one of those doors is the SIM swap abuse. The risk here is that somebody who is not a legitimate subscriber is able to convince an operator. We're talking about where you have multiple, where we have AI images and the likes of them, which was highlighted at the beginning of the call, and they are able to take control of mobile identity. So the question becomes, before a SIM replacement is approved, how do the operator establish that the person requesting that action or that high-risk event is actually the legitimate owner, right? And this would naturally lead to us ensuring that biometrics are verified, right? Then the next door is identity spoofing. This is where maybe someone attempts to present themselves as another person, right? And use another person's identity information to complete a registration or a service request. So having identity information is not necessarily seen as proving that you are the person associated with that identity. It's not simply as proving that that is exactly who you are. So this is where face matching becomes very important. We are moving beyond just simply asking, does this information match? And asking, does this person presenting themselves actually corresponds with the entity that is being claimed? We now try to match the image that we have captured to the record that we have saved in the database. The third is SIM farming, and this is where the issue is not necessarily one fraudulent transaction, but patterns of activities involving multiple SIM registration or transactions that should raise questions. So once you observe a pattern, right, and being able to validate an activity in real time rather than discovering the problem much later, you observe a pattern in the system. It calls for you to also be alert for that. And this also now gives us rights to ensure that we have real-time checks within the system. The earlier you detect an abnormal pattern, the less opportunity you give that pattern to become a larger fraud problem, right? Another important door is agent manipulation. And I think it deserves particular attention because operators operate through large and distributed agent network, like I highlighted before. The agent is often the closest person to the customer and therefore plays a critical role in the registration process. But that also means the agent can also become a control point that fraudsters attempt to exploit. So we try to address the question that do we actually have a process? Can our system enforce that this process, regardless of which agent is performing the transaction, the process is or the system is tight enough, right? And this is where the workflow controls becomes important. The system should be able to determine what the agent is allowed to do, what requires additional approval, and what cannot be bypassed, right? And this particularly links to the workflow control, which I've highlighted. For number 5, I would say registration bypass. Every registration process has rules, right? Rules already established in by NCC, which is regulator, and other telco regulators across Africa. So the risk emerges when there are ways around those rules. So perhaps an agent can override something, or a user that is carrying out that activity has an override function. Perhaps a transaction can be completed without a required verification, right? Or an exception can be approved without like a sufficient visibility. So we need to move from having policies that say what should happen to the system, right? That technically enforce what cannot happen, right? So this also attaches actions to and also map registration bypass to role-based permissions, right? And for the last one, it's another very critical point, which we have also mentioned on this call, is a weak audit trails, right? And this is interesting because an audit trail does not necessarily prevent the initial fraud transaction. What it does is gives you the ability to understand what happened. Cynthia had highlighted how you'll be able to retrace an event where you now say fraud has happened. You'll be able to now retrace and recreate the event, be able to establish accountability and demonstrate that this will also show that the organization or the operator has the right controls in place. If someone goes does the wrong thing, or something goes wrong, say 6 months from when that action has been happened, somebody asks who performed this transaction, was the right verification done, was there an override, who approved it, and so on. What happened at that point in time, right? So the organization is able to needs to be able to answer those questions with evidence. So an audit trail should not simply tell you that the transaction happened, right? It should actually help you reconstruct, just like we highlighted in this call, how the transaction happened. Okay, so these are the 6 doors, and the obvious question here is how do we actually close them? And this is where technology becomes important, right? The objective is not simply to just digitalize an existing registration process, right? It is also to embed the controls directly into the processes so that they are consistently enforced. And that's why Seamfix today has developed and built the Smart X solution, which is a customer onboarding solution that has some of these enforcements built based on the nuances from the telecom operator and the likes of them.
Thank you so much, George. So we're looking at these fraud doors. One of them is SIM swap abuse. We have identity spoofing, SIM farming, agents manipulation. Then I think you mentioned registration bypass and weak audit trails.
Yeah.
All these doors, hypothetical doors, which do operators typically underestimate?
Okay. Before I answer that, I would like to highlight here that fraudsters don't actually attack the strongest part of the process. What they look for is the part of the process where someone can actually make an exception, either bypass a control or make a decision that the system cannot identity verify. So I think operators generally do a good job of focusing on the obvious part of the fraud, things like identity verification and making sure that the person presenting themselves is who they claim to be. Where I think they often give less attention is what happens around that verification process. And the first area, which is a critical point, which I mentioned, is agent manipulation. In many operators' environment and the ecosystem for telecommunications today, particularly those with those MNOs that has large distributed agent network, the agent is effectively the last point of interaction before a SIM registration. And I also thank God that things are being done by the MNOs, just like Bunmi had highlighted, where they actually go as far as arresting agents that have done that are carrying out fraudulent activity or carry out SIM replacement. So even if the operator has a strong process on paper, the question of how consistently is that process being followed across the entire network is what we need to look at. And the second area is exception handling. I think this is particularly important because fraudsters necessarily don't attack the normal process. Like I mentioned, they look for situations where the normal process doesn't work. So for example, if a customer cannot complete a particular verification step, what happens next? Is there a clearly defined and controlled exception process that does not simply say, let's find another way to get this done, right? So this is where an exception can potentially be a fraud door. So we also look at administrative overrides. These are actually necessary operationally, right? But it has to be legitimate. And of course, we also look at what I've mentioned as well in terms of the audit trails. If we have a fraudulent replacement, can we go back to establish who performed it and how that was actually done? So for me, the common thread across these areas is that the operators may have a strong policy, but the real question is whether that policy is technically enforced and whether there is evidence that it was actually followed.
Thank you so much, George. So I just want to ask Mr. Bunmi, which of these challenges deserves more industry attention? Which of these fraud doors deserves more industry attention?
Okay, thanks, Uyo, and thanks, George. So none of them is less to give attention, right? Every one of them deserve a very strong attention. We don't compromise any of them, all right? To be honest, not just because I'm here, we subject some of these things to internal control. We do check regularly on our side to be sure that these controls are still in place, and we try to, simulate most of this scenario that the attacker normally try to explore. But one good thing has come out from here, which everybody mentioned, is that we all understand that validation and authorization is not the same thing. So the one thing is we want to validate that you are who you are. But the person that is also doing it, the processes around it, which George is trying to emphasize here, we don't pay less attention to that as well. Today, our partners, the agents, they have different level and different level of certification and things they must, the criteria they must meet up. Every agent that needs to perform this, even the agent has to be biometric verified. We know your identity, not just your number, even your NIN and all that are also, validated to be sure that the person performing the same swap of SIM registration have the right, privilege and access. So that authorization part, we don't joke with it. The validation, which is, now validating the ownership of that person. Like I said, there are lots that is still ongoing. Even we are still building more fence around it as well. But in place presently, we put a lot of things in place, not just on our side alone, together with the regulator, both NCC and MC. If you ask me, because of, I know probably you are trying to wind down as well. Strong identity assurance is required from our side and will not compromise or reduce that. Better operational excellence and continuous, awareness and training and retraining. And the internal audit, that is also something we do very frequent to ensure that processes are not broken. Like George said, you always be looking for the weakest area. But one thing I need to say before probably I drop my last comment is that security is everybody's concerns, right? Your number, your NIN, your digital identity, and they should be kept very, very sensitive. There are sensitive information about you. Everybody is on social media today. Things are trending. And those things you post, they can link into something. Once somebody knows your number, it's as good as he knows everything about you. There is one theft we have not talking about. People taking over people's WhatsApp. I'm sure we heard things like that people are taking ownership of WhatsApp. Even though MNO don't have control over that, but NCC, the regulator, need to do something about that with Meta. So these are things that can also curb some of these things we are talking about. But like I said, it is everybody's identity, everybody's responsibility. One thing we are also doing is, in terms of the number recycling, I'm sure some of us probably will not know that number recycling, that the number you own is not really your number. You are just saying my number is 0837, blah, blah, blah. That's not your real number. There's something we call HIMS, which is your real number, right? Even that one you are saying is a license number that we pay for. That is why if you don't use it after some time, maybe 1 year, we recycle it. But you have cases whereby a line has been recycled, but somebody is already using it, or the previous owner is using it for SMS alert. So when the new person is using it, still getting the alert of that. So I believe these are things that towns will cause and help us to eliminate. I mean, it's just that everybody needs to take it as a responsibility that have to be security conscious and don't expose your information online. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bunmi. Security is everybody's concern across board, for the operator and for the end user. Thank you so much. George, you mentioned Biosmart X, Seamfix's solution. I want to ask how Biosmart X can help operators address the vulnerabilities that these fraudsters can cause for themselves.
All right, thank you, Uyo. Yes, Biosmart X is Seamfix customer onboarding solution that we deploy for MNO operators. What it helps operators do is strengthen the identity, workflow, and audit controls around registration and SIM replacement process. Right. The objective is to make the critical control difficult to bypass. Right. Consistently enforced and also traceable when something goes wrong. So if we go back to the 6 fraud doors, which are highlighted, X addresses them through a corresponding set of controls. For example, SIM swap, but X is able to carry out biometric verifications. For identity spoofing, we're able to carry out face matching to prove the identity of who the owner is in terms of ownership. SIM farming, Biosmart X is also having the real-time validation and checks. And for agent manipulation, it has the workflow controls. Lastly, for the registration bypass, there are the role-based permissions and the likes of them. So regarding the weak audit trails, Biosmart X is able to generate comprehensive records of the transactions and also be able to trace what happens and the events that led to such a breach. So the important thing is that these controls are not operating independently. They form part of the registration workflow. And that means the organization can move from, organization that is using Biosmart X can actually move from relying primarily on people to enforce policies to having the technology enforce those policies consistently. So that is the nutshell of what Biosmart X does today as a solution.
Thank you, George. So to Cynthia, looking at the controls that George has demonstrated, what stands out from a legal risk perspective?
Okay, thinking about it, thank you. I think what stands out for me is the shift from a policy-based compliance to an evidence-based compliance. And I think that will sit around weak audit trails. Because if I tell an agent, for example, based on my experience in the telecom industry, I mean, to verify a subscriber, that is just an instruction, right? But if the system will not let that transaction proceed until the instruction, which is verification, right, is done, that is the control. And if the system records who did it and what the result was, that becomes evidence. So you see everything like a chain of events coming together. They're all dependent on each other. And that evidence again changes the whole conversation. Now I can investigate, show accountability, show due diligence, points to what exactly or where the control failed, and that's going to be easy for me to do that if I have all this information. So for me, speaking from what George said, even just a minute ago around technology and all, I think technology becomes governance when it enforces control and keeps the evidence. It's very important because why, of course, how does it become a governance issue or a protection over that company operator where you don't have the right, evidence or trail to be able to guide you in the future when the fraud has already happened? So another thing I wanted to notice is this. While I think for me, in addition to that, is that when you have a good audit trail, it allows the organization to reconstruct that transaction in a way that, fine, it gives you, first of all, the accountability question. You're able to answer that, who did what, traceability, when and where it happened, evidence, of course, what verification was actually used in that series of events. Then again, one vital thing I think it also helps, and this is for also my regulatory affairs officers and different operators, is that you're able to give a good regulatory response to the regulator, because they will actually ask. The ability to respond properly when the regulator asks can relieve you from a lot of issues that could come up, because they're just building the evidence for a bigger issue, maybe like a pre-enforcement notice that may come up. So you have to have all those information in place because those questions will come. Another thing is that it creates a protective measure around remediation. So you have the ability to identify exactly where the control failed, because we all know that systems fail. Not everything is, always as it seems. So systems will fail, but for me, I would say in total, I mean, in closing on this matter, is that a successful transaction should not just simply generate a success status, but if for a high risk transaction like this, I think every organization should be able to demonstrate why it was allowed to succeed. And that's what I think is my take on this matter. Weak audit trails is a major problem. And we need to nip that in the bud.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you. That's a very lovely perspective. So as we round up, it's been such a wonderful conversation. And I wish we could keep going for hours and hours, because this conversation is so deep, it would appear. To round up, I want to ask each of our speakers, if there's one thing telecom operators should prioritize over the next 12 months to reduce SIM swap risk, what would it be? I would like to start with Mr. Bunmi. If there's one thing telecom operators should prioritize over the next 12 months to reduce SIM swap risk, what would it be?
Well, it's okay. I hope I'm audible. Please confirm.
Yes.
Yes, you are. You are, Bunmi.
Okay. Okay. Around identity management, particularly in terms of validation of ownership, putting more in terms of course, all these things they are not coming cheap, right? And it's to invest more in technology around those processes I mentioned the other time, and the technology we are putting in place around liveness detection, the AI technology to also detect all these AI videos and pictures that they can use to exploit the system. So these are things that are already priority for us, and these are things we are already working on just to be ahead of the fraudsters, right? I'm sure it's not just my organization. A lot of other MNOs are also putting the same thing in place. And like I said earlier, which is what I will still emphasize, it requires a collaborative work, not just on the telecom side. People like your organizations, the security, the names, the regulatory, everybody needs to play a good role and a vital role to ensure that we eliminate this SIM swap fraud. Well, I want to say thank you for the opportunity. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. George, what about you? What's the one thing you think telecom operators should prioritize over the next 12 months?
Okay, quickly, I would say the focus over the next 12 months for telecom operators should be quite simple in what they are currently doing. First is seeing how they can focus more on also closing some of the vulnerabilities within the registration process, particularly around exceptions and areas where control can be bypassed. Also strengthening, automating, and also automating verification controls so that security is not dependent entirely on manual intervention. And third would be improving visibility and auditability. So operators can clearly see what happens, who did what, whether the right controls are followed. This is currently to a large extent being enforced today, but these are focus that I think areas where if we can strengthen those areas more, we can make SIM registration and replacement process not only more secure, but also more accountable and easier to defend when something goes wrong.
Amazing. Thank you, George. How about you, Cynthia?
Okay, well, I would say we just have to move from compliance by policy to a compliance by design. And I think if I would prioritize having an end-to-end identity assurance, system for every high-risk SIM-related transaction, such as the SIM replacement. And I will make it measurable because we all know that what gets measured gets managed. If you don't measure what's going on, for example, you don't test the failure, you have to stress test. I mean, you have stress testing, you have to stress test everything that's going on. What happens when the biometric verification fails, who can override the fallback feature, because sometimes some of these things, maybe something has failed, then you have to do a manual process. That manual process should not be the weaker link because it's manual. Then anybody can just go and do a manual process of verifying someone. And we need to ensure that the industry is not just in a quick need to put more policies on the shelf, but to actually check that that there's a lot of effectiveness to the controls that we have. And the only way you can do that is by measuring it by, like I mentioned already. So I think that's what I would say every operator should do now in the next 12 months. Compliance by design.
Amazing. Compliance design. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Round of applause, virtual round of applause for our speakers today. They've been so amazing. Thank you, Bunmi. Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, George, for sharing your perspectives, your unique perspectives today. The key takeaway from
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. The key takeaway from this discussion is very, very simple. SIM swap fraud may begin as just a fraudulent incident, but it often will end up as a question of accountability. The organizations that are best positioned for the future will be the ones that implement compliance by design. They don't only prevent fraud, but they also demonstrate that the right controls were followed, were enforced, and documented. Thank you so much for joining us today. Because of our time, we cannot take questions. If you would like to continue the conversation, please schedule a demo with the Seamfix team. We're going to be dropping the link in the chat box. Please schedule a demo with the Seamfix team as soon as you can to continue this conversation. Thank you all for joining us today. It's been so amazing to have you. We will send the recording of this session to your emails. All right. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.